my dear friends, and welcome back to another Star Wars news update. It is I coming at you once again, your favourite galactic hostess, Star Wars Meg. I hope you all had an amazing Christmas. Today, we have some big Andor news. Now, this has been making the rounds, and there has been a lot of confusion. There seems to be a lot of misunderstanding, conflation of certain facts, and so today I hope I can provide a little bit of clarity. Forbes posted an article revealing the full cost of Andor's 2 seasons. And Season 2, which is coming in April, has a record-breaking budget. The total so far for both seasons comes to a whopping $645 million spent. And as you can imagine, the fandom had a lot to say, especially fans of the Acolyte. A lot of them have turned around and said, well, hang on a minute, Disney. Isn't this a bit hypocritical? Haven't they been saying for a couple of years now they're trying to reduce budgets on new Star Wars shows? And wasn't the reason the Acolyte Season 2 didn't happen because the budget was way too high on the first? The subsequent low viewership didn't justify that budget. And even just a few days ago, a Disney executive put his hands up and said, we spent too much on the Acolyte. So Acolyte fans are baffled, thinking, so why then are they spending an enormous amount on a second season of a show that received similar viewership? Well look, as someone who loves Andor and didn't like the Acolyte, I want to clear a few things up. There's a lot of misinformation going around, but when you look into the nitty-gritty, it makes a lot more sense. But from the word go, I just want to say this. As much as I love Andor, this level of spending is absurd. I've seen fans say, well, why didn't Kenobi get this level of budget? What about Book of Boba Fett? Why don't they spend the same amount on legacy characters? While I understand this perspective, budget cannot save writing problems. You know, you can inject as much money as you want, but if the creative vision is lacking, it's not going to make a difference to how fans receive it. It might be a good-looking, terribly written show, but a terribly written show nonetheless. Also consider, Andor is 12 episodes a season, Kenobi was just 6. But let's focus on Andor and the Acolyte. One huge consideration is that many of the sets are built from scratch. I mean, they literally constructed mini towns. But then you might say, well, if viewership is all that matters, both the Acolyte and Andor Season 1 got low viewership. But the very big difference is Andor was highly acclaimed by fans and critics alike. Not to mention, my dear friends, another massive factor in all of this, Andor Season 2 was greenlit years ago, way before the more recent decision to cut shows with very high budgets and low return on investment. Had Andor's first season come out this year and not in 2022, based on the same metrics, I don't think it still would have gotten the second season. So it's not a case of hypocrisy, but more in terms of timing. Another factor which in turn contributed to the amazing reviews is the budget was better spent. It is of course subjective, but to my mind, nothing in Andor was out of place. Nothing looks cheap. Whereas on the other hand, and again this is just my perspective, my opinion, you look at how much was spent on the Acolyte, and you're left scratching your head thinking, where did that money go? Both shows did on-location filming, but somehow the Acolyte turned some of the most beautiful locations in Europe into drab, dull, watered-down backdrops for some of the most uninspiring scenes. And then to contrast, look at the way in which the first season of Andor transformed the Scottish Highlands or other parts of the UK. And then another factor is the salary of the cast, notably Diego Luna, Stellan Skarsgård, and Forrest Whitaker. So it's very easy at face value to say, why in one breath are they promising to cut funding for very expensive Star Wars shows, and then in the other, injecting nearly $300 million into a second season of a project which didn't do well in terms of viewership? I think they're really banking on the fact Season 2 ties into Rogue One. I have a feeling their marketing, especially around Star Wars Celebration, is going to be very heavily focused on Krennic, K2SO, and other familiar aspects, maybe even of the original trilogy. And I have a good feeling, and I have said this before, Season 2 is going to perform much better than the first. So Forbes says this, Disney has revealed the cost of making Star Wars Andor has surged to £504 million, $645 million, after it spent a record $290 million on Season 2. This staggering sum eclipses that of The Last Jedi and The Force Awakens. They describe, quote, close attention to detail and lavish effects. Before we carry on, let's take a look at some fan reactions to this update. Andor is worth the money. Whoa, it's so much money. I can see it on the screen though. Epic show leading to the greatest intro to a film series ever. Andor is worth it. And then in a follow-up piece, Forbes asks an intriguing question. Does this budget prove how Disney has lost control of Star Wars? This has certainly been a more popular opinion in the fandom in recent years. The future of Disney Star Wars remains unclear, but this latest bit of news must produce a reckoning inside the company of what exactly they're doing, and how much longer this can continue. Your initial thoughts may be, well, Andor is great, so surely Disney must think it's worth spending that much. But what they point out is that in light of recent Star Wars projects, in light of Disney's handling of the brand, they shouldn't be spending this kind of money on a TV show. Disney is not in the charity business. But despite the fact that yes, you could argue Andor is the best Disney Star Wars project, it is nowhere near the viewership and interest that would justify those costs, and not just for Star Wars, across the board. In the opinion of the writer, quote, "I'm not even sure it would be justified if it was pulling in billions of minutes watched and it was a Netflix show. These numbers are out of control," he says. And then they posit the management of Lucasfilm, the way Disney has handled the IP, mainly on streaming in the last few years, and invested so much, is insane. They've lost control of the situation, and they say under no circumstances should they be injecting this kind of money into a show. And in their opinion, it all started with the failure of Solo: A Star Wars Story in 2018. That's when Disney and Lucasfilm panicked, so after The Rise of Skywalker a year later, they were like, we have this brand new initiative, Disney+. The Mandalorian came out, and it's not going to be until 2026 Star Wars returns to the big screen. But it's a problem indicative of a wider management issue. The fact they can't identify the right problems. The reason Solo failed wasn't because it was a bad film in and of itself. It was due to releasing off the heels of The Last Jedi. And I suppose what this article is really getting at is Disney needs to stop throwing money at things. Lucasfilm needs to stop announcing things. They need to get their act together and focus on a handful of projects they can deliver on well. An opinion going round, and I have seen this quite a lot, is that Star Wars needs an Agatha all along, a relatively cheaply made show that fans love and performs well, something that's a departure. In terms of thematic change, you have to say Skeleton Crew is that show, but even that budget was huge. At least we can say Andor Season 2 is likely to be very impressive. And Tony Gilroy did tease there are a couple of sequences that in and of themselves cost them a big chunk of this budget. So here's a full breakdown of the costs. This is for both seasons. Total studio revenue is $511,827,808. And now a breakdown of the expenses. $72 million in wages and salaries, $9 million in social security and pension costs. The biggest amount are the production costs, $563 million, and so, thus far, the net profit is $107,000. But it doesn't end there. It's also revealed the show received a massive $129.3 million reimbursement in return for filming in the UK. So in total, we have $645 million in spending. While this isn't likely to increase the number significantly, post-production costs are yet to be added to this amount. So, regardless, the final figure will be gargantuan. How do you guys feel? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to give me a big fat thumbs up, subscribe if you're new, check me out on socials, and may the Force be with you, always.